Hey, welcome back to True-Moto-Resto. And on today's video, we're finally going to get torn back into that CBX750 engine and see if we can confirm the problem and get that fixed. Get that thing all buttoned back up and get it back in the bike. Stay tuned. All right, so the engine is out, as you saw in the last video. If you didn't catch those previous two videos, up there in the playlist, you can check those out. How I got this thing out of the frame, which is a bit of a pain because there's no removable frame section on a CBX 750, but it's out. So what do we got? We have a starter chain, we have a cam chain, and we have a bunch of tensioner parts and new bolts and fasteners and slippers and whatnot. So this stuff here is for the starter chain. So it's a brand new starter chain tensioner in its entirety. That is the slipper, and with my brief diagnosis, I mean, this should be changed anyway. I don't know if it was replaced before, but these are prone to failure, so it's going in no matter what. This is a piece that I think, this slipper is what I think has failed. I believe that something is broken on the one that's in there, and it's just kind of moving around. I seem to be able to make it move with the end of a screwdriver through the starter hole, but we'll see if that's the case. I did pick up a couple of extra bolts and fasteners that hold all this stuff together while I was there shopping. I thought, well, might as well get everything I need. And then for the cam chain, I got a new cam chain slipper. I got, what else did I get? This is a spring, a new tensioner spring. I couldn't buy the entire assembly. And then there's, this is just the pin, the tensioning pin. It wasn't expensive, so I thought, well, I'm in there, they have them available, I'm just going to grab what I can because this stuff is getting harder and harder to find. And then these are from Tony Galea, from Galea Cam Chains in the UK. So this is the cam chain, this is the starter chain, and these are Tsubaki chains. The ones that are on the bike, the OEM ones, are DID chains, and maybe I can show you in a second what the difference is. And then I've just got this is a generic gasket kit. It's a different one than I used last time. I couldn't find the Athena one, so that's what's left of the Athena stuff that I didn't use last time. So this is basically just going to be the basic gaskets that I need to put this thing back together. Hopefully everything's in there that I need. Okay, so here is the difference between a Tsubaki chain and a DID chain. So you can see this, the DID chain is this one here. This is the factory one. It's got the links here are kind of, so this is like a double plate, a double plate here, and then two single plates. So that's kind of the way it's laced. I guess that's the terminology for it. And then this is the Tsubaki chain. So it's got basically 5 single plates and then 4 single plates, and they're kind of interleaved together as individual plates as opposed to doubled plates here. So apparently the Tsubaki chains are better, stronger, and more reliable than the DID chains. Interestingly, the chain that is in there, which you'll see when we get this thing apart, is in fact a Tsubaki chain already. And I did believe and suppose that this engine, when I took it out last time and took it apart to fix the sprag clutch, I figured it had been apart before because I saw the chain in there. Figured it was a new chain on the starter, and also because the case halves were put back together with silicone, which I don't like to use. I like to use proper Permatex gray or Honda Bond or Yama Bond or whatever is available. This stuff just doesn't seem to kind of peel off with the oil and then get stuck in the oil pickup like silicone tends to do. So yeah, so here's all the parts. This is what I've got to go at. I'm sure with all of this stuff I can fix what I need to fix, and then we'll get this apart and see what's going on. All right, first step here and splitting this case is going to be to remove the bolts out of the top, and on this engine there are 4 to take out. There's one here, 1, 2, 3, and then number 4 is way down in that hole there. Okay, so here's a quick lesson learned. I never realized that these rockers just kind of sit in there. So when I turn the engine upside down to get at the bottom of the crankcases, they all just kind of fell out. Fortunately, I was able to tell where they all came out of. But yeah, these things are not held in by anything except by the camshaft, I guess, once the cams are reinstalled. So they just lift right out. All right, so all the bolts are out. They're in the template there, except for one, which I see that I forgot to remove. There you go. Oil pump is already out of there. I took that out and took out the O-ring that goes right around there, so don't lose that. And yeah, now I got to try to get these cases apart, which is going to be a little more difficult than I think it was when I did it the last time. Now those cases actually popped apart pretty easy. I didn't really need to whack it too hard. All right, so here's the problem. Let me just get a flashlight here. Okay, so here is the scenario. So, well, I think, first of all, let me say that I think this tensioner system is the old original tensioner. And I believe that this tensioner that I purchased, which is radically different in its operation, is probably the upgraded tensioner, because I know there's an upgraded versus non-upgraded, so I'm guessing this one is the upgraded one. Let's hope, right? And this does not operate in the same manner. That being, so this has got a plunger, as you can see there, with a spring on it, and then there's a ratchet on the top, whereas the one that's in here now, it basically is a 2-part ratchet, right? So it's got, so this thing here is spring loaded, and then this little, so the part that I thought was broken, which is the part way down the bottom you see there moving, down in here, right down there on the underside of that chain. I thought that was a fixed slipper, but it is not a fixed slipper. So what I can only suppose has happened is that maybe the way that, because I tightened this up. I mean, when I installed this originally, like, it was tight, right? Like that. So it must, it must kind of just give out, and then it works loose, and then it doesn't hold tension. So now what I have to figure out is, so that's where it's supposed to be. But the mystery for me now is, when I replace this bottom one, how does that now work? Does that just become a fixed slipper and then all the tension is provided by this guy? Because on this, on the old one, this is more fixed, and the tension is being provided by the lower one being effectively being pulled up by this spring-loaded arm here. So yeah, it's a little perplexing. I'm gonna have to figure this out. Okay, so down there, see that little right by my fingertip there, there's a threaded hole, which currently has nothing in it. And I don't know if it had anything in it before, but this fixed slipper, that attaches this way. So that's on a pivot on this end, which I have to take out from the other side. And then that's the fixed end that's supposed to go in this hole here. So see, there's the tensioner and the slipper assembly that is in the manual, and that is the new one that I have. So it seems to me, logically speaking, I can't imagine the Honda manual. This has got to be the original edition. I don't know. It's a copy, but see, direct copy of an original factory publication. So I really think depends on when this thing was published. So I'm gonna have to make some inquiries with some experts that know way more about this than me. All right, so I did a bit more research, and it appears, thankfully, that this is the upgraded one. So this part number here is about the 4th or 5th superseded part number for this. So yeah, what I did, I went back onto CMSNL, and the original part number was superseded by another. So I looked at that part number, it was superseded by another. Looked at that part number, and it was superseded by this. So that tells me that I'm all good to go. The only thing I'm now missing, though, is a longer bolt, because if you compare these two, this is much thinner, and when you put this mounting bolt in here, that doesn't do much of anything for anybody. So I'm kind of dead in the water on reinstalling this until my local Honda dealer gets me a new longer bolt. So I ordered the correct one, and apparently, in addition to that, if you see this extra steel plate here, that I think is maybe part and parcel of what makes this the upgraded part. So Tony Galea said to me that if you find an extra steel plate between this top plate and this aluminum alloy component here, then you've got the extra piece of plating, and you see how it's all welded together there. So looks like that's the or riveted together. That should be the upgraded one. So anyway, next steps. So I've taken there's a cover that goes over here with like a little nozzle on it. That's been removed, and now I'm going to remove this nut off here, or bolt, whatever it is. So I'll probably have to grab a hold of this assembly with my universal holder tool, crack that off. You can then actually slide that whole assembly out and kind of drop the pieces off the end of the shaft as it comes out. All right, so this is the nut goes on the end of the generator shaft, and so the washer that goes with that. So it's the nut, the washer, the case. Then there's a spacing washer for the sprag. And there's the generator shaft itself, and then this is the sprocket. Okay, so a view inside here. In order to get the rest of this tensioner system out, so it's basically pinned down here where the square and pointy with the screwdriver. That pin has got to come out. In order to get that pin out, there's a a locking bolt that comes from the bottom. So basically it comes from the well, it's on the bottom now, but it's actually on the top of the case. It comes this way up, and then down in here, you can see in the in that starter hole right here, there's a large screw head. That's what has to be unscrewed. That's the actual pin itself. Next step is I need to get the crankshaft out. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all these connecting rod caps off, leave the pistons and the rods kind of right where they are, and then just pull the crank out with the chains on. And the reason, of course, that I need to remove the crank is it's the only way to get both of these chains off for replacement. So let's get at that. All right, so crank is out. I've just got the caps kind of all laid out. I did mark them ahead of time, so I make sure I get them back in the right spots. And then I just left the pistons and everything in there. What I am going to do though, before I put all of this back together, is I'm just going to put some pieces of rubber tubing or plastic tubing on these threads here. So when I put the crank back in, there's less chance of me damaging it with the rods when it goes back in there. One thing I noticed when I took the crank out is this rod number 2 bearing was still stuck on here. It did not stay in the cap, and it didn't stay in the rod. And to me, that looks like it's down to the copper. It's starting to wear. So I might, and it doesn't really fit very well either. It's kind of a tighter curve. So it'll fit on here, but you can kind of see it wants to sit up. You kind of have to push it on for it to go on, where the others all just kind of sit comfortably on there. You don't have to put them on. All right, so I just ordered some new bearings for this. These are not worn terribly through to the copper, but they're still worn to the copper. So coming this far apart, there's no point in putting those back together, especially when all the other ones look much better. So for the sake of $50, which is what they are, basically $20 each plus tax, we'll put new ones in. And there's 3 different sizes or thicknesses of these. I guess there's a brown, a green, and a yellow, or an A, B, and C. 3 different part numbers. And so in order to get the right ones, there's a couple of things you can do. Stamped on the end here, you can only see half of the number where that is right here where my thumb is. So in each case, each one of these is stamped with a 2. There is also a 2 on here, but in addition to that, there's also sizes for the crank pins. So the size of the crank pins, and then I think this is the size of the con rod and cap. And so you take the 2 and the B, in this case they're all the same, they're all 2 B's. You take that and basically look up in the book and it will tell you. So if your con rod ID is a 2 and your crank pin OD is a B, then you need to order the brown bearings. So that's what I ordered. So So while I have ordered the new bearings, just as FYI, I did mic all these crank pins, and they're all measured the same. And there doesn't seem or even feel to be any rough surfaces on this number 2 so for whatever reason, that number 2 bearing is worn a little. I mean, it's just starting to get to the copper, so just best to replace it. And the other thing, I think I found the last one of these in existence on a CMS NL, so I figured I've got that apart. I mean, it was ridiculously expensive for shipping. I think the seal was $15 or $20 Canadian, and it was $40 to ship it. But again, there's no point in taking it all this far apart and not putting a new seal on there. So while I'm waiting for parts to arrive, I'm just going to been going around cleaning off all of the surfaces of any of the sealant and the remaining Honda Bond or Yamaha Bond or Permatex Gray or whatever it is that I was using last time. And typically what I like to do is, obviously I want to be careful that I don't dump whatever I'm scraping off inside the crankcase. I mean, it is all going to get cleaned out thoroughly before it goes back together anyway, but that being said, I use a razor blade scraper on here and just kind of gently move that along and make sure that I'm getting all of the remaining adhesive off. Try to keep this thing as level as possible because I don't want to take off any aluminum. I also, it's quite normal for these cases when you use the Honda Bond or the Permatex Gray or whatnot, you get a little bit of that stuff kind of buried inside these bolt holes and whatnot. So just being careful, especially on the side that's threaded. You don't want to damage threads, but it's good to carefully pick out. If you have a plastic pick, even better. I don't, so I just have to be careful that I don't damage anything. Most of them just kind of pop out any of the globs of Permatex or whatnot. So there's one that kind of got, they all just kind of generally pop out like that pretty easy. But go around, take your time. As you're going around, inevitably, or not inevitably, but it's not unusual to find spots where this thing just kind of, it just stops against the aluminum, it won't slide. And if somebody in the past, maybe it was you, maybe it wasn't, has pried those cases open in a more ham-fisted manner, then you're going to get like burrs on the edge of the aluminum. So taking a very small detail file and just very carefully, like I use something like this, just kind of tickle up those areas and smooth them off until that razor blade passes smoothly over all of those surfaces, and then that way they're going to mate up a little cleaner when it all goes back together. The other thing that's not a bad idea, if you're careful and comfortable with it, especially if there's been thread locker on some of the bolt holes or bolts, or you're concerned that some of the sealant might have got into the threads and whatnot, it's not a bad idea to chase the threads with the correct size tap. But again, you got to be careful that you're using the right size tap. So using these thread pitch gauges is a good idea. You lay this against the side of the bolt and make sure that these teeth fit right into the threads properly. Make sure you can't see any light through it, and then you've got the right pitch. Choose the right size tap with the right pitch, and then carefully, I try not to use a tap handle if I can. I try to use just my my fingers just to work it in, and just to clean out any debris that might be in there. What I don't want to see is chunks of aluminum coming out. You got to be really careful. You're not cutting recutting the threads. You're cleaning the threads out. So that's why it's obviously critical that you get the right pitch and the right size tap. And I just prefer to be gentle with that kind of stuff. I don't like to go at it in a hand-fisted way, because then you're just going to bugger up the cases, and that's not good at all. So all of these copper washers need to be annealed again so they can be reused. And I've chosen to reuse these because the ones that come with the Athena kit, or the replacement kit, are thinner. Now I'm just resurfacing these crush washers just to make sure that any imperfections are gone out of the top so they seat nice. This is just a piece of 400 sandpaper on my drill press table. Okay, before I start putting the crankshaft and stuff back in, I've just put some plastic tubing over the end of these bolts on the connecting rods, just so I don't accidentally mark, gouge, or otherwise damage that crank when I start to maneuver it back into place. Alright, so here are my new bearings that are going to go into cylinder number 2 connecting rod. And what I'm going to use before I start reassembling all of this crankshaft and con rods and whatnot, I'm going to use, I'll clean off all the bearing surfaces, and then Permatex Ultra Slick assembly lube will be going on everything, just to make sure it's all got lots of lubrication in there. So yeah, one half will go in here, and yeah, the other half will go into the bearing cap, and then we'll see how easy it is to maneuver this guy back into position. I do have a new crank seal for this as well. Okay, that was a bit of a fiddle getting the crank to drop in there and all the rods on, but eventually got it. I found it was easy to push all the rods down, get the crank in, and then pop the 2 of those rods and those pistons back down to kind of bottom dead center. So that looks to be okay. So yeah, we'll start to put those connecting rod caps back on, and then I'm gonna, each stage of this, I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of gently rotate the crank just to make sure everything's moving freely and I'm not getting anything binding up as I move through the reassembly process. Alright, so all of the con rods caps are torqued to the correct specification. 30 to 34 Newton meters is the spec, and I've rotated the crank a few times just to make sure everything is good. Seems to be smooth. So next, I think will be, and you'll see down here, I've got the new fixed slipper in already. I put that in before the crank. I guess I forgot to film that part. So I think the next step is going to be installing the generator shaft and the the sprag clutch assembly, which is kind of still sitting over here. So we'll get that back in, which will mean that this chain here goes back on, and then we'll see how all that fits back together. All right, so I'm having quite a bit of difficulty getting this generator shaft and everything back in. I do have it threaded in. I have everything on the sprocket. There's still some slack here, although it's with the new fixed slipper on the bottom, there is kind of less slack to begin with. The end of the generator shaft is starting to come through the hole there, so that's fine. The problem seems to be getting the O-ring kind of there past just getting it started to slide into the opening, and then getting the other part of the gear, the back side of that starter chain assembly to mesh with the generator side of it. After I just put this on to hopefully to try to pull the case, the generator back against the case here. But right now this will just spin. If I spin the generator back here, this doesn't move because the back side of the driven gear is not meshed with the generator yet. That should happen once I get this gap closed. So my plan is to try to tighten down these Allen bolts, pull the generator assembly into position, and then I should be able to get that nut on the end there. And then hopefully when I rotate the crank, this whole assembly will start to turn. All right, so that did the trick. Using the cover to pull that in has now properly engaged everything. So you can see here that if I rotate the crankshaft, everything is moving as it should. All right, so next step is I'm going to start to install the tensioner in here. And says you got to Loctite the threads. So I'm using the hybrid orange Loctite on here. Now that could be correct or it could be incorrect, but that's what I'm using. Now the way they say to install this, just for reference, is there's a ratchet. Basically this component right here has got teeth on it, and you have to kind of retract that all the way to keep the tension off of this top ratcheting slipper. There's basically a plunger that pushes down on the slipper, and that plunger has ratchet teeth on it, and they're all on this shaft right here. And right now there's a metal clip, I don't know if you can see that on there. That metal clip right there is holding that ratchet peg up in this direction. Once I get everything tightened down, I'll be able to pull that pin, and then it'll allow the ratchet to move down and to apply tension via the slipper onto the starter chain. Seems to have gotten that. So what I'm going to do now is carefully pull this pin out. I don't want to drop that pin anywhere. So that's been removed. So there we now have good tension being applied to that thing now. So everything's still moving nice and freely. The only other thing I would mention here is if you're turning everything over, just checking that everything's moving properly and whatnot. Just be very careful of the cam chain, that it doesn't get kind of all bound up at this point. All right, next step here is there's this kind of oil nozzle assembly has to go back in. So a little bit of Loctite on the threads, and then this guy can go back in here. On this gear set here for the transmission, I wish I should move the camera so you can see what I'm doing. On this gear set on this side, there's some alignment marks for the top of the case, and that's because under here there's a hole in this bearing and there's a pin on the case itself, so that has to locate in that particular way. And then similarly with this, there is a locating hole here, but there's actually no pin in this particular gear set. But there is a clip. There we go. Puts that stuff on. So the next step will be to dry fit the other half of the crankcase and locate. So the trick, what you have to watch for and have to make sure that you do properly, is the shift drum and the forks are still in the other half of the crankcase, and so when you assemble, you've got two forks that go here, and then one fork that goes here. You can see, you know, where they go because there's kind of like a journal here with holes in it for oil. So there's a single fork in the middle that goes on this one, and then the two other forks will locate here. So at the same time, you want to make sure that there's a boss, like a little metal nub on the other end of the shift fork where it attaches to the shift drum, and that's as the shift drum rotates, that little boss kind of follows the grooves around the shift drum. So you got to make sure that that stays located in the drum and the forks go on there. So I'm going to do all that. I'm going to put the shifter back on and make sure that I can click through the gears. And what I'll be doing there is I'll just kind of rotate the crank or rotate the output shaft, and then click the gear, rotate everything, click another gear, and that way I should be able to see, even looking through the where the oil pan fits, I should be able to see the selectors, the forks, selector forks moving these gears back and forth. And I just want to make sure that it's going to go through all of those gears before I go to the next step of cleaning the faces of this again and sealing it all up. So here's what I'm talking about with the shift forks. So these two locate on this gear set here, and then the other gear set close to the middle is where this shift fork locates on. And if you look kind of down there, so right there, you can see there's like a little boss. If I move it, you can see that boss sits right in that groove there. So when it shouldn't be able to go anywhere else, but when I locate these forks, this part of the fork on the transmission gear set, I want to make sure that that is located in there. And if everything is positioned properly, it shouldn't be a problem. But that's the general idea. And if you look on this side, see right now, you can see right there that boss is not located in the shift drum. But when you move this into position, so it can actually drop onto the gear set, that basically just kind of drops that locating boss into the shift drum where it's supposed to be. All right, so here's the kind of the dry fit, I'll call it. So there's the one shift fork located in the correct spot on the one gear set. And if I point back in there, you can see that's the other shift fork, and then back there is the other shift fork. So they are all properly located. And so what I have to do now is I'm just going to get the shifter and just make a few moves with that. What I have to be careful of again is that I can't rotate I don't think I want to rotate the crankshaft at this point, because the issue is the cam chain is not attached to anything at the head end. I don't want it to get all bound up anywhere. So I'm just going to see if I can turn the output shaft on this thing, which is kind of back here. You can see if I turn the output shaft, stuff starts to rotate. So that's That's what I'm going to do. All right, I just tested shifting through the gears fine. One thing I should have probably mentioned at the outset is it's a good idea to make sure the transmission is in neutral before you take it all apart. All right, so now is the step that I don't know, I find it to be a little bit delicate. So what I have to do is I have to put the, I'm using 3-bond liquid gray gasket on here. I'm going to put it on both sides of the case, and then we'll get this thing bolted back up. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of ultra slick assembly lube on the crank bearings before it goes back together, and also a little bit on these transmission journals where the shift forks go. Okay, so I used the torque wrench. Everything has been tightened to spec. The 8mm and the 6mm crankcase bolts. So what I'm going to do next is just use the wrench to turn over the engine. Just gently turn it over. I'm moving this over so I can keep an eye on the cam chain, make sure it doesn't get all kind of caught up here. Everything's moving smoothly, so that's what I want. And then the last thing I'm going to do here, just for added comfort, is I'm going to run through the gears one more time. One thing it does call for is when you reassemble, to use some sort of assembly lubricant for the fasteners. So molybdenum disulfide grease, or I used ARP Ultra Torque on these main 8mm crank bolts here. So the next step, I'm going to put the top side 4 bolts back in, and then once I've done that, I'll flip the engine upside down again, and then I can put the oil pump back in. All right, so the oil pump is back in. I put the oil pressure sensor switch back in there as well. All right, so we're not done. We're not done. I was not happy with the way this crank seal was sitting. When I started looking at it, it was kind of sitting slightly crooked, and I was getting a bit of oil leakage because I lubed everything up pretty good when I put it back together. And it was kind of pushed in a little bit at the top. And yeah, that just wasn't doing it for me. I was concerned that I was getting up with an oil leak there, so I thought, as much as I hate to have to pull the whole thing apart again, I'm gonna do that. So here we are, it's all apart, oil pump back out, etc. I'm gonna clean the cases again. I'm gonna dry fit the cases again and make sure I'm happy with how that crank seal is sitting there, and then we'll button it all back up again. So this is another dry fit, so I'm a little happier with the way that seal is fitting there now. So, and the other thing I'm doing once I put this engine back together is I'm going back to the Permatex gray. The 3-bond stuff that I used was absolutely horrible. So I think that seal's about as good as I'm gonna get it. It's not quite as perfect as my OCD would like, but basically what happens is as soon as I start cranking on the case bolts, it just kind of pulls it back ever so slightly at the top. But I've done it like 3 times. I've taken this thing apart 3 times, and this just seems to be the way it is. Maybe I'm just being overly fussy about it, but yeah, I had a problem. I still wasn't happy with the seal seat. And then I took it apart again. I cleaned the cases. I re-annealed all the copper crush washers. I put it back together again. Then I wasn't happy with the way the transmission was shifting and moving. It just felt wrong. So I pulled it apart again. And then I started to put it together again, and it wasn't fitting quite the way that I thought it should. Like it was taking too much effort to close the case gaps. It wasn't seating down, which I like it to do right away. So I took it apart again and I cleaned it again and put each time putting new case sealant on there. I re-annealed those copper washers multiple times. And now it's back together. Everything is shifting. Everything feels smooth. And I'm hoping that crank seal in the end of there is okay. It's as good as it's gonna get, I guess. But anyway, what a pain in the backside. What a pain. But anyway, we're just about done with that. Everything is back in again. Oil pump and whatnot. Stay tuned for the next episode where I turn this thing back the right way up, and then I've got to get it stacked up on some more blocks and get it strapped in so I can reinstall it. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.